As the sum of each generation before it, the next generation Corvette stands alone as the new standard of precision and performance, of engineering and technology, of everything that makes an icon, and a Corvette, a Corvette.
The Family Car Guy. Welcome back to another video. I want to welcome you guys back to the channel. It's been a few weeks. I was celebrating my 8th anniversary with my beautiful wife, Mrs. Family Car Guy, in the great state of Maui, Hawaii. I guess Maui's not really a state, but Hawaii. And we were just having a great time. Everybody should go there. I like to call it God's remote office. But let's move on from that. Let's get to the topic of this video. The dyno numbers are in for the C8 mid-engine Corvette. Motor Trend has done some tests, and lo and behold, we've got some controversial dyno numbers. So let's get right into it. So the huge headline here is that the C8 Corvette reads higher than advertised cranked horsepower. As we all know by now, we've seen the statistics, we've seen the numbers with the Z51 package, the LT2 V8, 6.2 liters, of course, is putting out 495 horsepower and 470 pound-feet of torque at the crank. But the dyno numbers that the Motor Trend team was able to achieve on their very first run, as a matter of fact, was 558 horsepower and 515 pound-feet of torque at the wheels. Now, assuming 15% driving train loss, that's 656 horsepower and 606 pound-feet at the wheels. They go on to state that this 15% represents the power consumed by everything between the engine, crankshaft, and the drive wheels, including the inertia, all the spinning parts, power to run the hydraulic pump, and an automatic or twin-clutch transmission, such as the 8-speed in the C8, the drag that occurs when gears spin through lubricating oil, friction between gear teeth, etc., etc., etc. It's an educated guesstimate frequently used across industry for modern light-duty automatic transmissions. Manuals experience slightly smaller losses. Older heavy-duty automatics experience slightly larger ones. Now, they all go on to make some disclaimers, such as the car was handed back to the Corvette team every single night. So Motor Trend basically only had the car in their possession when it came directly from the Corvette team. And they had it during the day, and then they gave it back at the end of testing every day. They had it for over a week while they did other testing. They did their track test, they did their performance metric testing. They were planning on doing an MPG test, but they didn't have the right equipment for the test, so they decided the next best thing was to do a dyno run, and boy, we are glad that they did that. So they assumed automatically that a dyno run would be best in 5th gear. They said that would be the closest gear that would get them to a 1-to-1 ratio, which is usually the ratio we use for dyno testing. So the second run that they did produced 558 horsepower and 512 pound-feet of torque at the wheels. Using a 15% drivetrain loss, that's 656 horsepower and 602 pound-feet. Then they did a third run, 561 horsepower and 515 pound-feet at the wheels. That's in 5th gear as well. That translates to 660 horsepower and 606 pound-feet at the crank. Then a 4th run, 556 horsepower, 523 pound-feet. Also done in 5th gear, translating to 654 horsepower and 615 pound-feet at the crank. Run number 5, they did in 6th gear. And they ended up getting 478 horsepower and 536 pound-feet at the wheels, translating to 562 horsepower and 630 pound-feet of torque. Run number 6, which I'm assuming they did in 6th gear, they don't say, but based on the output, which is 478 horsepower and 544 pound-feet of torque at the wheels, translating to 562 horsepower and 640 pound-feet of torque at the crank, again assuming 15% drivetrain loss, we're getting way more horsepower and way more torque than what's advertised. So now the question is, why, right? That's what we all want to know. So we first start by looking at the gear ratios, which they confirmed from Chevy, and I'll have them posted here on the screen. But I want to call out that fourth gear actually, without adjusting for the axle ratio or the transfer ratios, which we'll cover later, fourth gear appears on paper to be, just by looking at the transmission itself, as the closest to a 1-to-1 ratio, being at 0.878. The engineers provided two reasons for the power discrepancy. Number one, they said that the C8 Corvette makes more horsepower when it's cold than when it's hot. That really doesn't make sense though, because as we have seen through these 6 runs, the dyno numbers were relatively similar. You know, assuming that we're especially when you compare the ones that are in the same gear. Number two, Chevy also said that they certify most of their engines through SAE, which is the Society of Automotive Engineers. They're an independent party that is present during the dyno test to ensure the final output ratings. They don't do a simple pull from idle to redline either. They slowly ramp up the RPM and let them stabilize while accelerating further. So for that reason, engineers say it's not uncommon for single chassis dyno pulls to read high, and it's extremely unlikely that any car will ever generate less than rated output. So Motor Trend, they did their homework, they did their due diligence. They checked the SAE database, and they showed that the LT2 V8, the 6.2 liter V8 in the C8 Corvette with the Z51 exhaust package, was SAE certified at Pontiac Engineering Center in Michigan on April 9th, 2019. And at that time, the engine was rated at 495 horsepower at 6,450 RPM and 470 pound-feet at 5,150 RPM. Power and torque graph after 3 tests looks very similar to the Motor Trend dyno graphs. Drivetrain loss, according to the Chevy engineers, via a dual clutch transmission, they say is less than 15%. Of course, they didn't give an actual ratio of what the drivetrain loss is or was, but even if you factor in 0 drivetrain loss, we're still getting much more wheel horsepower than crank horsepower. So now, after providing the transfer ratio, which happens to be 1.459 to 1, and an axle ratio of 3.454 to 1, which is interesting because I think my C4 is like a 345 gear ratio out the factory. It's either 345 or 354. I can't remember, but very similar here. Anyway, so once you do the conversion for the transfer ratio, the effective gear ratios are below on the screen. And as you can see now in 5th gear, when you account for the transfer ratio, now it makes sense because now that translates to 0.953, getting you very close to that 1-to-1 ratio. So the Motor Trend guys actually were pretty close to correct right out the gate when they did their dyno testing. So the fact that the LT2 engine was certified by the SAE means that there could be more power getting to the wheels on the comparatively cool chassis dyno pulls. So of course, we got to rule out, is this some kind of fluke of a car? We don't know, but let's also rule out the dyno as well. So to do that, they got a 2020 Ram 2500 Limited with the 6.7 liter Cummins turbo diesel. That is rated from the factory at 850 pound-feet of torque. On their dyno, it read 760 pound-feet at the wheels, meaning about 890 at the crank, which really isn't too far off from the numbers that Ram claims. So what are the conclusions that we can draw from this? So first of all, there's a couple things that come to mind for me. Number one, this could be a ringer Corvette. We don't know for sure. It very well could be though. Number two, we definitely do want to see, and Motor Trend even states that they really want to see what post-production and customer vets, when people start taking delivery of their cars, are they going to see these similar dyno numbers? And who's to say? If you were to ask me, my guess would be that they may or may not, but I would not be surprised if this engine is underrated from the factory. I really wouldn't be surprised. Would I be surprised if it was underrated by as much as it looks like it is in Motor Trend's testing? Yes, that would still surprise me. But the fact that the motor itself is underrated doesn't really surprise me. I mean, we've seen the Toyota Supra, the new one, be underrated, and everyone's been surprised by that, and that's stellar. But it's been reproduced enough times to where you can reasonably draw the conclusion that that motor is underrated from the factory. So, and BMW itself has been known to underrate their engines for years, right? So this really wouldn't be surprising. It's actually really exciting, and it just further shows you how ridiculous a bargain the Z51 equipped C8 Corvette is right out of the gate. I mean, we're not talking, again, Grand Sport, Z06, ZR1. We're talking literally the base model with Z51 package. Now, the other thing I was thinking too, and for those of you who do follow my channel, if you do not follow my channel, please go ahead and hit that subscribe button and go ahead and hit that notification bell as well. I am the Family Car Guy. I own 2 Corvettes. I have a 2006 C6 Z06 in machine silver, which is putting out, according to the dyno sheets that I have, 635 horsepower and 541 pound-feet of torque at the wheels. Now, this is what I was getting at. My C6Z, with all the modifications that it has done to it, it's using those numbers were achieved on a dyno. And I know there's people out there that, I mean, this appears to be in the Motor Trend magazine, in the Motor Trend article, a Mustang dyno, which some people say reads higher and is not as accurate as the Dynojet, which I don't want to really get into that argument, but the fact still remains that even if that's true, right, which generally speaking, I do admit that it is true. I mean, the reasons and the comparisons behind it, I'll leave that to other YouTubers, other gearheads to get into, but the fact still remains that even if this car was put on a Dynojet, it probably would still read significantly higher than the crank horsepower that Chevy advertised from the factory. And that's what makes this car so amazing. And so, you know, when I think about my car in comparison, you know, correcting for 15% powertrain loss, I think the Z06 puts out like 730 horsepower at the crank if we account for 15% drivetrain loss based on my dyno numbers, and maybe even higher if I were to put it on a Mustang dyno. Like we said, mine was done on a Dynojet. So let me hear from you guys. What do you guys think? Do you guys think that the C8 Corvette is a ringer? Do you guys think that this is ridiculous? Do you think we need to wait and see? I mean, what are your thoughts? I mean, I think it's been pretty well established, the fact that the car is doing 0 to 60 in 2.8 seconds and clocking a quarter mile in like 11.2 or 11.3 seconds, as we've seen from several of the car review magazines already. I mean, it's already a screaming deal, you know, at about 65, 66 grand, as long as you tick that checkbox for the Z51 package. So let me know what you guys think in the comments. Please, like I said, hit that notification bell. Please join the Family Car Guy family. I do also have a C4 Corvette LT4 with the Grand Sport motor. This is my other Corvette, and working on all kinds of things. It's winding down in Minnesota here because we're getting closer and closer to snow time, which means Corvettes are going away for the winter, but we do have some winter projects on the docket and some other things coming up, so please stay tuned. As always, you guys be blessed. Peace out. See you in the next one.